Terry's not afraid to share what he thinks about any topic in the NFL, and he was on radio recently, and this is what he had to say about Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers. Take a listen.
That is just, to me, is a joke. What are you going to bring him in for 1 year? Are you kidding me? I mean,
that's not the Steelers' way, right?
No, man, that guy needs to stay in California and go somewhere and chew on bark and whisper to the gods out there.
I'm sorry, Terry, man. Chewing on bark. That's obviously he's referring to Aaron's let's call it unconventional offseason practices, which is Aaron's personal business. He's free to do that. The problem is when it interferes with a commitment to a football team that is for reasons that Terry, and I think most of Steelers Nation has no idea of, that becomes a problem. So, first of all, Terry and Aaron have a beef that goes back years. Terry was probably the most critical of anybody of Aaron when there was a whole, I think sort of when this was talked about in the book that Ian O'Connor wrote about Aaron Rodgers. He actually interviewed Aaron for that book. I could not recommend it more. It's an outstanding book. But one of the things that was brought up was that's kind of, I feel like when the public, certainly the media, when their mood sort of turned on Aaron was when the whole vaccination, I'm immunized thing happened, where he said he was immunized. People assume he's vaccinated. Midseason, he had COVID. We remember how all that went down. Terry was as critical as anybody of Aaron at that particular moment in time. So I don't imagine that there's a whole lot of love lost there. And Terry is the greatest quarterback in Steelers history, is like, oh, this guy's going to wear the helmet. Don't care much for that. The thing that I am amazed by, and that Terry is amazed by, is not just the Aaron off-field stuff, not just that the Steelers, and I talked about this on Monday, that they're so obsessed with this whole non-losing season. Like let me just say this real quick. They do realize that's not actually like a thing that other teams care about, right? Like they do realize that, like, that's not the standard in Baltimore. You know, the team that's kind of run the AFC North for the last decade or so, the team that's got the two of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in the NFL, Lamar and Burrow. That's not like really, they don't really care about that. Oh, 9 wins, 10 wins. Hey, met our quota, guys. Other teams really don't care about that. That's kind of just like a Mike Tomlin thing that he cares about, and his most ardent defenders seem to just worship at the altar of is the 9-win, 10-win season and getting clocked in the first round of the playoffs. For reasons I'm not entirely sure, but hey, weird flex, but knock yourself out with that. It's that Terry Bradshaw brings up a great point. The Steelers, listen, I thought they were a really good roster last year. I still think they're a solid roster this year, even with the losses. Dan Moore, Najee Harris, all of it. George Pickens, which I think was basically they swapped George Pickens for DK Metcalf. The picks were even tight, all of it. That was an upgrade in my mind, but whatever. This roster, unless you had an A-plus tier 1 level quarterback like a Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Lamar, I don't think this is a tight. This goes without saying. Unless you have one of those guys, this is not a championship contender in the AFC, which is always stacked, which always has the best quarterbacks and has for the really my entire life. It seems like there was a time where the Steelers were in that group with Big Ben. So why are you getting Aaron? Because Aaron. There was a point in time for majority of his career, Aaron was tier 1. Aaron has been a 4-time MVP. Aaron he's the only quarterback in NFL history with 500 touchdowns and less than 200 picks. It's one of the greatest ever. That goes without saying. I heard someone talk about the other day how he might not be top 10. Listen, I've been as critical as anybody of Aaron Rodgers. That is an absolute, no doubt, top 10 quarterback in the history of the game. No questions asked. I think the second most gifted QB I've ever seen in my life to Mahomes. So with all of that said, he's not that player anymore. And for the millionth time, we'll show you this graphic. Since 2022, Aaron Rodgers, 56 touchdowns, 23 picks. So again, decent touchdown to INT ratio, but only completes 63% of his throws, 223 pass yards per game, pass rating of 90, which ain't that good. He's 8 games under 500. That's not very good at all. 0 playoff wins since 2020, 0 Pro Bowls since 2021. And in that midst, he suffered the most brutal injury an athlete can suffer, an Achilles tear. Oh, and by the way, he's like the oldest player in the NFL. That's not like a guy that's going to lead you to Super Bowl hopes, which I don't think the Steelers are delusional enough to think, hey, this could fix it. What they're doing is, okay, we don't want to have an embarrassing quarterback room of Mason Rudolph, Skylar Thompson, and Will Howard, so this just gives us credibility. And what does credibility give you in the NFL? Well, it gives you 8, 9, 10 wins, and you're in the mix, and you're in the playoff hunt. And anytime they show those graphics, you're like in the wild card, the last wild card team, or you're one of those like 5 teams they show on the far right column that are fighting for that last wild card spot. And maybe you get it, maybe you don't. If you do, you get clocked in round 1. If you don't, too bad. You got a mid first round pick, and you can't rebuild your team ever. That's what Terry Bradshaw is talking about. That is why, and just to add to the Aaron Rodgers part of it, we know the off the field drama. That's been the case. It really his whole career, but particularly the last half decade or so, where it's never enough for this guy. Even if you give him a brilliant offensive coach, Matt LaFleur, great weapons, a solid defense in what at the time wasn't a very good division, he still could not perform very well in the postseason. That's been the story of his career outside of, or really post 2010. It's the fact, and I did the research on this, because the post 2022 numbers, if you've actually watched Aaron, aren't that shocking. Aaron's time with the Jets we knew was bad, but so have a lot of quarterbacks with the Jets. I've often joked on the show that the New York Jets is the place where all young quarterbacks' dreams go to die. Apparently, it's all quarterbacks' dreams because Aaron's not exactly young by quarterback standards. We know the Jets have the longest playoff appearance drought in the NFL. They have not been since 2010. So 14 seasons, they have not been to the NFL postseason. So from 2011 to, 2024 and counting. 14 seasons. They've had 6 quarterbacks in that span, Aaron being the most recent, that have started 15 or more games. Aaron has been the worst one. We can show you the numbers. Now, none of these win percentages are exactly impressive. Ryan Fitzpatrick won 46% of his games. Zach Wilson won 38% of his games. Geno Smith won 36% of his games. Josh McCown won 35% of his games. Sam Darnold, who at one point his last year with the Jets, the team started 0-13, won 34% of his games. Aaron Rodgers won 33% of his games with the Jets. That includes the Achilles heel game where he only played 4 snaps. He gets credit for that win because he was the starting quarterback. Aaron Rodgers, among starting quarterbacks, like longtime starters for the Jets, 15 starts or more, has been the worst Jets quarterback throughout this playoff drought. Freaking Josh McCown won more than this guy. Ryan Fitzpatrick, who was known more for his great beard, his Harvard education, and playing for half the NFL, won well more, from a percentage standpoint, way more games than Aaron Rodgers. Geno Smith, that was a low point of his career with the Jets. Higher percentage of his wins than Aaron Rodgers. Sam Darnold was viewed as one of the biggest busts of the last decade with the Jets prior to, obviously, the great year he had in Minnesota, and now he's in Seattle now. Won a higher percentage of his games than Aaron Rodgers. Zach Wilson, again, massive bust. The understudy to Rodgers, who obviously became the starter for the last year he was with the Jets because of the Aaron injury, won a higher percentage than Rodgers. And that's the guy? Listen, you would think, I'm not saying, listen, the expectations for the Jets last season I found to be as delusional as it got. The fact that they were favored over the darn Josh Allen-led Bills to win the division was asinine. You would think Aaron would be better than those guys, than journeymen, than draft busts, than guys who were on their last leg, really only there to be quarterbacks to mentor the younger generation of guys, i.e. Josh McCown. Won a lower percent of his games with those guys with arguably better offensive players. He had Breece Hall and Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson. And he couldn't make it work. Coach got fired. Offensive coordinator got promoted because of him, and he was fighting a horrible OC and Nathaniel Hackett, who got demoted again. It was a mess. So even by Jet standards, he was the worst guy. And that's who the Steelers are waiting. According to Jeremy Fowler, and I'm sorry, I don't think this was Fowler. I think this was Schefter, Adam Schefter, reported yesterday. Well, they'll wait till September 7th. Which happens to be opening day against Aaron's former team, the Jets, in week 1. So Schefter's like, hey, according to what Schefter's been told, they will literally wait until opening day. No OTAs, no training camp, no preseason, a team he's never played for, and they'll kowtow to him to the very bitter end. So Terry's outrage, and by the way, anyone that doesn't think Terry Bradshaw, that his opinion doesn't hold weight in Pittsburgh, I would hope so. This is the Packers had the first of the modern NFL era. Modern NFL is really post-merger. Oh, let's do that this way. Post-merger, the Steelers had the first dynasty in the NFL. Post-merger, post-1970 merger. Terry Bradshaw won 4 Super Bowls in the 1970s with one of the greatest teams ever assembled, those 70 Steelers. He understands, if nothing else, I know he's old school, I get it. He knows the Pittsburgh Steelers culture. He knows the Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, Mike Tomlin culture. No BS, football first. This is what we're about. Listen, if Aaron was still prime Rodgers, first of all, the team wouldn't be getting rid of him, because even with all the BS that he had in Green Bay at the end, he was still winning MVPs. You're not going to trade that guy. You're not going to move on from him. It was the second that Aaron became an average quarterback, they couldn't wait to get rid of him. But even still, if he were on the market, I wouldn't love waiting for Aaron. I'd be annoyed as hell if that were the case. But if I'm getting 40 touchdowns, 5 picks, and an MVP finish, you have to take him at that point. You're getting the worst Jets starting quarterback of the last 15 years. And you're just letting him dictate every single move that you make this offseason. You're making Mason Rudolph's job harder. You are, by the day, undercutting the so-called standard that Mike Tomlin has allegedly set in that organization. And shout out to Terry Bradshaw for calling it out, because it's nonsense that they're even waiting for this guy. Listen, I've said from the jump, if they don't like any of the quarterbacks in this draft, and I was a proponent of drafting Shedeur Sanders, especially after he continued to fall. I think that was a big mistake not drafting Shedeur. But if they were like, hey, we like the prospects next year and what's going to be a much better quarterback draft more than Shedeur, okay, fine. Their scouts know more than me. At that point, Mason's the best quarterback on your roster. Will Howard, hey, maybe even see what Will Howard's got. He was a 6th-round pick. I wasn't overly impressed with what I saw from him at Ohio State, given what he had around him. But sure, he was a national champion. Give him a shot. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with starting Mason to week 10 and starting Will Howard from week 11 on. And what you'll get out of that is 5-6 wins, and finally, you can bottom out enough to actually address, the most important position in the history of team sports, quarterback, and do it with a high upside prospect. Instead, they are addicted to mediocrity. And addicted, apparently, so much so, they'll wait for a guy who's not even that good anymore and is the biggest distraction in the National Football League. What standard? Kudos to Terry Bradshaw for calling it out. He wasn't just calling Aaron Rodgers out, who he has a long-standing beef with. He's calling out his franchise that has seemingly abandoned the Steeler way, if you will. And it's unacceptable. I'm amazed that this has gone on as long as it has. Truly amazed. Now, maybe Terry has so much weight that, and this has gone on so long that we're post-Memorial Day and Aaron is still not a Steeler, that, hey, this is too much. I mean, Cam Hayward, the most respected voice in that locker room, Walter Payton, Man of the Year winner, like the definition of what you want a Pittsburgh Steeler to be, basically said, you want to be a Steeler or not? You're a Steeler or you're not, in that interview about a month or two ago. Well, he's still not a Steeler. And you got guys out there busting their behinds in the practice field. I get it's OTAs. It's not like full-blown training camp and pads. I understand it. And it's not mandatory, but the guys that miss, it's notable. It's talked about. It's a part of segments on shows like this. After getting ready for the season, and who's not there? Going on a podcast tour, as he always does. And Aaron, by the way, if Aaron wants to retire and do that, feel free. He enjoys going on these shows. He enjoys going on Rogan or going on a couple of Barstool shows. I got a problem with that. Aaron is interesting. I've said, the downside of Aaron retiring for my show would be, well, we don't get the drama of Aaron Rodgers. That's like 3 or 4 less carving up the context segment I have for the football season. I got to look elsewhere. It's unbelievable that they're kowtowing this guy. It really, really is. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube, and be sure to go click that big red subscribe button and check out the other clips and full shows from Carving It Up Live, as well as our other incredible content creators here on the Grid Network.